Chun-Sik Lam, a 64-year-old retired cook from Vancouver, was born in Hong Kong and had spent several years preparing Chinese cuisine in Japan before immigrating to Canada in 1991 to join his family. Known for his elaborate meals shared with friends and family, Chun-Sik was also an avid outdoorsman. Fishing was his favorite pastime, but as provincial regulations tightened, he sought other outdoor activities.
Before we continue, Christmas is almost here, and we've got something special for you. Imagine cozying up in the comfiest Christmas hoodies, designed to bring the magic of the holidays to life. Whether it's for you or the perfect gift for someone you love, our exclusive Christmas hoodies are here to make this season unforgettable. Don't wait. These one-of-a-kind designs are selling out fast. Visit uncoverizeshop.fourthwall.com now and grab yours before it's too late. And here's a little holiday treat. Use promo code CHRISTMAS to get 15% off your order. Let's make this Christmas the coziest one yet. Link is in the description.
In 2015, Chun-Sik became deeply invested in hiking, going on 2 to 3 hikes a week and carefully maintaining his equipment. He joined the Vancouver branch of the Sower Society of Education, part of Hong Kong-based Sowers Action, an educational charity. Through the society, Chun-Sik often hiked with groups, preparing meals for his companions, including one of his regular hiking partners, 43-year-old Roy Tin Hao Lee. Roy, also originally from Hong Kong, had lived in Vancouver for decades with his parents and 3 sisters. On Christmas Day 2016, Chun-Sik and Roy set out for a hike at Cypress Provincial Park. Arriving around 9 a.m. equipped with snowshoes, they planned to trek along the House Sound Crest Trail. By noon, they had reached the lookout at St. Mark's summit. This was confirmed by another hiker, who was greeted by the 2 men when they arrived there. This other hiker would be the last known person to see the 2 men. At 10 o'clock that night, a park ranger discovered Roy's car still parked in the lot. Due to frigid temperatures and an impending snowstorm, the ranger knew that if anyone was still in the mountains, they would be in serious danger. However, for these same reasons, the official search for the 2 men could not start until first thing the following morning. The weather would continue to hinder search efforts. Snowstorms created whiteout conditions, and the rescue teams endured temperatures well below freezing. Because of the conditions and the terrain, only highly skilled searchers could be used to look for the 2 men. More than 1,000 volunteer hours were spent looking for Chun-Sik and Roy. Helicopters were also brought in for an aerial search. Roy and Chun-Sik did have the appropriate equipment for their day-long hike, but not enough food or supplies to survive in the severe weather seen in the area in the days after they went missing. 2 days after they were last seen, hope for finding them alive was almost gone. The first day of improved weather the search teams had was 3 days after Roy and Chun-Sik went missing. The search was finally suspended after 5 days. The 2 men's cell phones played an important part in trying to find them. Police pinged their phones, which placed them on the northeast side of Mount Strachan. While the phones had a signal, neither man ever called for help. This could mean that they did not get lost, but rather faced some sort of that kept them from completing their hike. According to Mike Danks, the team leader for North Shore Search and Rescue, the cell phone data indicates that one of the men fell, while the other moved around trying to help him. He did not specify which man was which. It is believed that Chun-Sik and Roy most likely ran into trouble on their way back from St. Mark's summit, near the north peak of Mount Strachan. Because of the snow on the ground, they may not have realized that they were near the edge of a cliff. It is also possible that they fell when a snow cornice, an artificial ledge formed by hardened snow that they inadvertently stepped onto, collapsed. Because of a sharp drop-off, the area where they would have fallen is very difficult to search properly. The theory that the 2 men were lost on this peak was supported by new clues in the spring of 2017. A jacket, boots, and snowshoes were found in Capilano Lake. With these items was Chun-Sik's cell phone. Small creeks run into this reservoir from the base of Mount Strachan. It is possible that the items were brought to Capilano Lake by flowing water as snow began to melt. Roy Lee's family filed a petition to have him declared legally dead in September of 2018. In May of 2019, Chun-Sik Lam's family did the same. Neither of the men's remains has ever been found. Chunt's sixth brother Mark has purchased a burial plot for him in hopes of one day laying him to rest there. Tabitha Kalek was a 38-year-old mother of 6. She was a member of the Inuit community in Resolute Bay, Nunavut. According to her family, she was an adventurous cook but very cautious about her own personal safety. In 2002, Tabitha was unable to spend Christmas morning with her family, so she spent Christmas Eve with them instead. On Christmas Day, Tabitha's body was discovered inside her home. Tabitha's autopsy would find that she had both antifreeze and battery acid in her blood. The autopsy did not, however, make a determination about the nature of her death. According to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, there was not enough information available to rule her death a homicide. Could be a medical, could be suspicious. It's very borderline, according to RCMP Sergeant Yvonne Niego. Unless there's further information that can be followed up on, it's at a standstill. Tabitha's family believes that the case is a homicide. They are frustrated with the lack of progress in the case, and Tabitha's oldest daughter, Tracy, who had just turned 20 at the time of her mother's death, is still fighting for answers about what happened to Tabitha. She does believe that the RCMP has done what they can in the case but is understandably upset by the lack of a resolution. The official investigation remains open but inactive. Montez Jones was the oldest of 6 children and a graduate of Laney High School in Wilmington, North Carolina. His mother sometimes struggled to support the family, but always had Montez, helping run the household and protect his siblings. He was quick to let people know what he was thinking and always ready to stand up for what he believed was right. In 2008, the 25-year-old was working for a tent and party rental company. He was also the doting father of 3 young children, 2 daughters and a son. While Montez was no longer with the mother of his children, Jamaica Kemp, the former couple was successfully co-parenting their children. Montez was very active in helping with the care of his children and saw them almost every day. According to his brother, Montrell, the only thing more important to Montez than his children was his relationship with God. On Christmas Day of 2008, Montez went to Jamaica's house early to help wrap presents and assemble bikes for his children. After spending the morning with them, he returned to his home in the 1300 block of Castle Street in Wilmington. Just before 4 o'clock that afternoon, he went back out again to walk to the store for some groceries. Montez was seen speaking with an American man in a black hoodie. Shots were fired and the unknown man took off running. Montez had been shot several times in the back and chest. Despite his injuries, he tried to run back to his home. He collapsed on the sidewalk before he could reach it. Montez was rushed to New Hanover Regional Medical Center and taken into surgery, but passed away during the procedure. Montez was shot on a busy street in broad daylight, leading investigators to believe that there are most likely witnesses to the crime who have not yet come forward. Montrell Jones believes that the killer is most likely someone from his brother's neighborhood, which makes it difficult for him to trust the members of his local community, since any of them could be his brother's killer. More than a decade after Montez was killed, justice has stood up and served in his case, and it most likely never will unless new witnesses come forward. If you have any conscience or any God in your soul, just come forward. Give my family peace, Montrell Jones asked in 2018. At 5:30 a.m. on Christmas morning of 2013, a police officer heard gunshots near the intersection of Park Avenue and East 9th Street in Plainfield, New Jersey. When he and the other patrol units in the area arrived on the scene, they found a man suffering from a gunshot wound. The man was rushed to Robert Wood Johnson University Hospital in New Brunswick, but was pronounced dead after he arrived there. The man was 25-year-old Rishad Day. Rishad was originally from Newark, but was living in Greenbrick, New Jersey at the time of his death. He was employed by Amazon, working for them in their warehouses in Newark and Woodbridge. The Union County Homicide Task Force and the Plainfield Police Division launched an extensive joint investigation into the case. However, their efforts have not yet resulted in any arrests in connection with the crime. In December 2018, acting Union County Prosecutor Michael A. Monahan announced that the investigation was still ongoing and that authorities were still seeking information from the public to help finally solve Rishad's case. Union County Crime Stoppers is still offering a reward of up to $10,000 for information that leads to the arrest and conviction of Rashad's killer. In Corpus Christi, Texas, Kevin Jazreel Davis, 18, committed a horrific crime in 2014, murdering his 50-year-old mother, Kimberly Hill, in the apartment he shared with her and his sister, Destiny. Frustrated with life and bored, Davis reportedly told his mother he disliked people and was contemplating suicide. Hill's response, that she couldn't stop him if that was his decision, enraged him and he decided to kill her. On March 27, 2014, as Hill sat on the living room couch, Davis attempted to strangle her with a cord. When she screamed, he panicked, retrieved a hammer, and struck her repeatedly, splitting her skull. Davis later admitted to police that after her death, he swirled her brain and sexually assaulted her corpse. The gruesome crime came to light when Davis called 911 on May 26 to report the murder. At the police station, he chillingly recounted the events in graphic detail, occasionally smirking during his confession. Despite describing his mother as the best, Davis's shocking actions led to his conviction and a life sentence in prison. Davis struck his mother in the head with the hammer at least 20 times, splitting her skull in the process. Davis then retrieved a kitchen knife that he inserted inside his mother's head wound. He swirled her brain around to make sure she was dead, Kevin claimed, and then inserted his hand inside the wound. He would tell detectives during a taped interrogation that his mother's brain felt like putty. Kevin then dragged his mother's lifeless body to her bedroom and raped her corpse. When he finished the sadistic act, he went to a neighbor's house saying he just killed someone and needed help. The neighbor dialed 911. Police arrested Davis without incident. At the police station, he made a full confession of the crime, giving details that even seasoned detectives found highly disturbing. Watch part of Kevin Davis's confession. During the interrogation, Davis told detectives that he originally planned on killing his sister too, but changed his mind. He further admitted that he often fantasized about having sex with dead bodies. With a smirk on his face, Kevin also told the detective that he was a virgin before he raped his mother. He stated, "I guess I've lost my virginity to a corpse," as he gently laughed. What did Kimberly Hill do to warrant such a violent death? Nothing warrants a son murdering than sexually assaulting his mother, of course, and Kevin could not give detectives one good reason for the crime. According to Kevin, she was a great mom that did not deserve what he had done to her. He said that she was the best mother in the world and went on to say, "I am a terrible, disgusting person." Kevin admitted that he had the best mother in the world, telling detectives that she did nothing to deserve what was done to her. He went on to say that he was a terrible, disgusting person. In reality, Kevin was a serial teller in the making, a psychopath who took sadistic pleasure in hurting other people. Although diagnosed by a psychologist with antisocial personality disorder, the doctor said he knew right from Moem when he brutally murdered and raped his mother. He readily admitted that he would telecan if ever released from prison. He also confessed to then fleeing the crime scene on his bicycle. Before he did that, though, he left several handwritten notes for the police, one of which read, "Chase me. Sorry for the mass, KD." But after a while, he decided against leaving town and called 911 to report his mother's killing and his crimes. Despite admitting to the murder and making a videotape confession, Kevin Davis pleaded not guilty to the charges in court. He later changed the plea. Davis smiled at the jury as they sentenced him to life in prison. He serves his time at the Jester 4 facility in Richmond, Texas, and is eligible for parole in March 2044. Story number 2, Story of the Killer Priest. We will be exploring the story of a killer, a priest that seemed to be normal, nothing strange or nothing weird about him. However, he did have a dark side. It turns out that not only was he a pervert, but he was manipulating people as he saw fit, especially women. And now, without further ado, let's dive into the story of gore. We're going back in time in the 50s in France. And we need to take note that the church at that time had a very important place in people's lives. Especially in the countryside, the priests were almost as important as the mayors because they were representing a type of moral authority that many people listened to. And this was the case in the small village of Europe where this story took place. A town that had about 400 villagers, Gur was born on the countryside and his family was very Catholic. They raised him so that he can have a career in religion as a priest. And even if that was not his first choice, that is exactly what he became. It is in 1950 that Guy became a priest at the Church of Europe. In appearance, this young man looked like the ideal priest. He was nice, friendly, kind, and very dynamic. Anything linked to religion, he did it very, very well. He had a lot of great ideas to help the village grow. He created a choir, a group to play in a theater piece. He did organize multiple excursions for the kids, and he was known to have created a soccer team for the boys of the village. The older people thought that it was very modern for him to bring all these items to the village, and the younger generation thought it was pretty amazing and appreciated the modern aspect that he brought to the town and to the religion. Dürer was apparently also a beautiful man, and the ladies found him very charming. Now, as I have mentioned at the beginning, underneath this whole angelic disguise guy was actually hiding a dark secret. His personality, he had a thirst for coelel pleasure, and he was using his charm to get closer to the ladies. After a lot of perversity and manipulation, a lot of the women actually gave in, and none of the women spoke as they were afraid that no one would believe them and did not want to be seen as the shame of the village. It is in 1953 that things took a different turn for Gaidia, and an incident happened that changed the plan of the priest. A girl fell for his charm, and guess what happened? She became pregnant. Now, of course, the priest denies everything, and he says that he is not the father. He threatens the girl and says that if she does not stop, he will file a complaint for defamation. Now, having a high influence in the village, Guy says that this is nonsense, and it is impossible for him to be the father, and of course having such an high influence. His followers believed him. He was even summoned in front of his superior, the bishop, to which he lied to you and denied the whole thing. And of course, this whole situation was shut down in reality. He was actually the father, and he actually took the girl to another village to give birth, where he convinced her to give away the child. And of course that story was never heard of or told to the villagers, or we could say maybe presume that if people knew, they decided not to say anything, because the priests had such a high influence on the villagers that they did not want to go against him once the story died. Guy went back to his normal ways and kept manipulating the people like he did before, but there was another incident in 1956. Reen Faye, 19 years of age, got pregnant, and again by Guy Dyer. Contrary to the other women, Rain did not want to give away her child for adoption. Not only that, but she wanted to raise him in the village of the Uruf, where the priest was Guy, was terrified, and he was afraid that eventually the child would grow up and resemble him. He was also afraid that this woman would actually speak. Eventually, speaking of which, in 1956, rumors started to make surface. A lot of parishioners were becoming pregnant in mysterious ways, and no one knew who the father was. The priest then starts to think about a plan and ask a military man from another village to come to town and pretend that he was the father. Unfortunately, that strategy did not work out, and no one believed the soldier was the father. That only made things worse for the mysterious pregnancies. December 3rd, 1956 is a date that changed everything. For the priest, Kai brings Rain in on a deserted road to try and convince her one more time to give up the child. She refuses again, and she was tired of the priest's request. So you know what she did? She got out of the car and started to walk back the opposite way back to the village. At night, Guy Dyer got out of the car and pulled out a 6.35 caliber pistol and fired 3 shots. The 3 shot hit Regine in the back of the neck and she died on the spot. Once the crime committed, the priest walked to the victim and dressed her and took out a knife and started to open Regine's stomach. From her stomach, he removed the baby girl that was still alive. The priest committed again an act that cannot be forgiven. He strangled the baby, stabbed it, disfigured it, and he did all the thinking to himself that if the baby is massacred that way, there would be no way, no DNA, if you want to call it that way, no DNA to trace the baby back to him. The disappearance of Regine was actually reported in the evening, and the weird part is that the priest joined the search party to find the Regine. Can you imagine that situation? I mean, the killer is with you in the search party trying to find the person that he just murdered. Is it just me, or that is just like twisted? The body was found very quickly, and because the priest was not an assassin, he didn't, think about cleaning up the crime scene, so it didn't take long for the cops to find the murder weapon, and they found the weapon casing that linked back to the priest. So the priest is now a suspect, and when asked during the interrogation, the priest denied everything. However, because of all the pressure he was getting, He just cracked and admitted everything. Now that story came out and everyone was devastated in France because he is now a criminal, and the church asked for Guy to be locked up with a false name so that it would not affect the church, and also the main reason was to make sure that the crime was not associated to the church. The court addressed the case of Guy de Noir on January 24, 1958. Of course, the villagers and the public opinion wanted the priest to be sentenced to death. The life of Guy was defined as a person that did enjoy luxury, sexual relations, and admired his own authority. And on his side, the priest was asking forgiveness because he had no clue what he did wrong. The jury did provide their verdict, and for most, they said that he was guilty of double murder. Of course, there was Regine and the baby. However, they did not want to sentence him to death. The jury did not want to send someone associated to the church to the scaffold. The priest Guy de Noir was therefore sentenced to perpetrated work. Now, that situation raised a lot of questions regarding the responsibility of the Catholic Church, and this is still a question that is being asked nowadays, especially for the priests who like other kids, if you know what I mean. There was an investigation that was done, and the report came out saying that the church knew the dark side that he was hiding before he was pronounced priest. His superiors noticed that he did not have a lot of faith and he was not really a believer in Catholic religion. The investigation did show that before being priest in Europe, he was sent to Blemet. While he was there, he did have a sexual relation with his parishioner, and instead of removing his status, they just transferred him to another city. Even there, his weakness for women did not stop, as he did have multiple sexual relations. You would think that the church would revoke his status, but instead he was just transferred to Europe, where the church was isolated and his temptations might be lower. But as we have seen, this was not the case. Des Noirdes was released in 1972. After being detained for 22 years, he was the oldest prisoner of France. Once again, the church came to his help after he was released from prison. He was welcome in a monastery in Brittany, or he stayed there until he died on April 21, 2010 at 90 years of age. Now we go to story number 3. Family slaughtered at Wells Great Provincial Park. The killer stalked the family while he let his violent fantasies run wild. 3 generations of a family left to go camping on August 2, 1982. They set up camp in the Wells Great Provincial Park, located roughly 120 kilometers north of Kamloops in central British Columbia. They enjoyed several days of cloudy family time, picking berries during the day and gathering around the fire at night, having no idea that they were being stalked by a killer. Among the campers was grandparents Edith, 59, and George Bentley, aged 66, their daughter, Jackie, 41, and son-in-law, Bob Johnson, 44. Also, the Johnsons' daughters, Janet, 13, and Karen, just 11. The Johnsons drove up with their daughters and pitched a tent for the girls. The grandparents brought a truck and camper where the adults would stay. The last anyone heard from the family was on August 6th when Edith called another daughter. It would not be until August 23rd that the family would first be reported missing. Bob Johnson was due back at work on August 16th, but didn't show. After a week with no word from him, his company filed a missing persons taints with the police. In spite of an extensive search, it didn't result in finding any of the family members. The biggest problems were the killer had a head start. With plenty of time to kill, get rid of the victims' bodies, and cover his tracks. The other, maybe even bigger obstacle was no one knew exactly where the family was camping at. All anyone knew was that the family was camping in the Wells Gray area, which is massive. They had no idea where to even start, but alone being able to follow a trail to find the family. It would take 3 more weeks and a mushroom picker to find the family. On September 13th, the current discovery of the Johnsons' 1979 Plymouth was found. It had been burned beyond recognition as it set off to the side of a mountainside logging road. The car held the bodies of the 4 adults in the back seat and the 2 young girls in the trunk. The bodies were burned so thoroughly that it came time to bury the family. They were all placed together in one child-sized casket. Through a forensic examination of the remains, it was determined they had been shot with a .22 caliber firearm. Locals were able to tell investigators where they had seen the family camped at. An examination of the area would turn a .22 casings, which helped identify the weapon used as a Remington pump-action rifle. What wasn't at the campsite was the truck and camper, the boat, and camping gear brought with the family, or any trace of the family at all. With no suspect in custody or even in sight, the media was pushing for answers. A tip came in that the family's truck and camper had been spotted. The witnesses said it was being driven by two French Canadians in central Canada. The media sprang into action, throwing this up as their headline and demanding the killers to be caught. In April, with still no lead, the investigators knew they needed to get creative. They reenacted what they believed was the crime scene for TV cameras and aired it across Canada. The next month, the police drove a replica Ford camper truck to Ontario in Quebec in an attempt to draw awareness for what people should be looking in for. What it did instead was flood the investigators with over 13,000 tips and sightings of the replica vehicle. The reward was raised from $7,500 to $10,000 for information leading to the truck. None of the tips led to the discovery of the camper and truck. It would be found by sheer luck. Two forestry employees were working on a logging road and stumbled across it. The camper had sat there on Trophy Mountain for 14 months. Only a few kilometers away from the crime scene, the camper was burned out like the car holding the family's bodies. This left the authorities to believe they were looking for someone local to the Wells Gray area and not two French Canadians as they had been searching for, since it was more likely that a local would know about the locking roads and the area in general. Taking a closer look at the person who lived closest to the crime scene led them back to David Rulian Shearing, 24. They have received a tip about him earlier in the investigation. When they followed up, the tipster had quite a bit to tell them. I hear earlier Shearing had asked him about re-registering a Ford truck and how to repair a hole in its door. This was a tip that the police had never divulged after finding the truck. It had a bullet hole in the door. After an interrogation by the Royal Canadian Motor Police, Shearing confessed. He went so far as reenacting the murders for the detectives. He turned over evidence that he had stolen from the family and the murder weapon, the .22 caliber Remington rifle. The ballistic test would prove that this was the weapon used to kill the family. The same weapon that had been hanging on his wall the very first time the authorities went to ask him about the family, right after they had been reported missing. Maybe it was because his father was a prison guard or his brother was a sheriff, but Shearing wasn't suspected when first interviewed. In his confession, he gave details of how it all happened. He had first noticed the family when he set up camp, fixating on the two young girls. Then, over the next few days, he watched their every move. On the night of August 10th, Shearing watched as the adults sat around the campfire and had seen the girls go into their tent for the night. From a distance, he took out the 4 adults with sniper shots. He said he then killed the 2 girls from their tent as they slept. After he said he loaded all the bodies into the car and moved it to the logging road, then set it on fire with 5 gallons of gasoline. He then cleaned up the campground, removing the family's possessions including the camper and truck. It would only be later that he burned these as he was unable to transfer them into his name. He claimed that he killed the family because he wanted to rob them of their possessions. It wouldn't be until after Shearing was convicted that he gave his full confession of how and he had been stalking the family. It was the girls that he fantasized about having sex with that kept him interested. That's why after telling the adults he kidnapped the girls and took them to his property nearby. There he raped and terrorized them for over a week. On August 16th, the day their father was due back at work, Shearing took Taryn away from her big sister. Once alone, he shot the girl in the back of the head. Janet would be left alive for one more day of torture before she would be killed like her sister. With the girls now dead, he took their bodies to the Johnsons' car where the other family members had been placed. He had actually only hidden the car in some bush. He put the girls in the trunk and got into the driver's seat with the 4 decomposing adult bodies in the back seat, driving it to its final resting place where it would be found by that mushroom pick for burned out. David Shearing pleaded guilty to 6 counts of murder. Shearing was sentenced to life in prison with no eligibility for parole for 25 years, the maximum penalty for second-degree murder. This would be the first time that this sentence was handed out in Canadian history. David Shearing, who changed his last name to his mother's maiden name of Ennis, was first eligible for parole in 2008. The National Parole Board ruled against his release, citing that he was still having violent sexual fantasies and had not completed a sex offender treatment program, so he was not ready to be released. Again in 2012, he was turned down for parole, applying again in 2014, but before his hearing, he withdrew his request. The National Parole Board has also been given a petition, which has over 15,000 signatures, advocating for the violent offender to never be released. In his own words at one of his parole hearings, David tries to plead for freedom, saying this about himself: "I was very selfish. He is supported by his wife that he married while in prison, Heather." Rochelle Thomas Stubblefield had a passion for running. A graduate of Portage High School, she was a standout member of the track and field team. During her senior year, the team advanced to state-level competitions, and Rochelle contributed to a relay team that set a school record. After high school, she attended Calumet College of St. Joseph on a track and field scholarship, majoring in criminal justice with aspirations of becoming a police officer. Rochelle was also an active and enthusiastic member of her college's Black Student Union. She was quick to volunteer, had a gift for making people laugh, and was known for her loyalty and support, which helped her form lasting friendships. Her athletic career took a pause when she became pregnant, expecting her first child, a boy she planned to name Amir, due on December 15, 2015. Her due date was just 10 days before her own 21st birthday, on Christmas Day. On November 10, 2015, Rochelle attended classes during the day as normal. Later that day, she attended a women's basketball game. The game would be the last place she was seen. Unable to get a hold of Rochelle, her family reported her missing on November 12th. Police would later learn that Rochelle had told some of her friends that she was going to visit the father of her unborn son in Gary, Indiana. It is unknown if she ever actually left town. However, the case has been assigned to the police department in Gary. There has been no activity on Rochelle's cell phone or her bank account since she went missing. Police searched several locations, collected some of Rochelle's personal items, and identified a person of interest in the case. According to police, the person of interest knew Rochelle and did not wish to cooperate with the investigation. Authorities have not publicly disclosed details about their searches or the person of interest in order to protect their investigation. They believe that foul play is involved in Rochelle's disappearance. Police provided most of this information at a press conference on December 18, 2015, 3 days after Rochelle's due date. The room it was held in was almost entirely filled with members of Rochelle's family, many of them holding up photos and flyers of Rochelle for the press to see. Despite the family's best efforts to spread awareness about the case and use the media to ask the public for help, Rochelle remains missing. Family was at the center of Amanda K. Jones' life. She was the middle of 3 children and was especially devoted to looking after her younger sister. She was also very close with her parents, Bertha and Hugh Probst. In 1999, she had married Scott Jones and started her own family. She and Scott divorced in 2002, but their marriage produced the light of Amanda's life, her daughter, Hannah. In December of 2004, Amanda attended an office Christmas party held at the Hillsborough Civic Center, a popular events venue and the site of the Jefferson County Fairgrounds. There, she met Brian Westfall, who worked at the Civic Center. Amanda went home with Brian at the end of the night. According to her family, this was out of character for her, but they attributed the decision to the fact that Amanda had recently ended a relationship. In January of 2005, Amanda learned that she was pregnant. After confirming with her doctor how far along she was, Amanda realized that the father of her child had to have been Brian Westfall and not her former boyfriend. In February, Brian agreed to meet with her back at the Civic Center. Amanda took Hannah with her to meet with him. When she told him that she was pregnant with his child, Brian, who had a long-term girlfriend, denied that the baby was his. He did, however, offer to pay for Amanda to end the pregnancy, which she refused to do. Amanda and Brian had very little contact with each other in the following months. During that time, Amanda learned she was expecting a little boy and decided to name him Hayden Lucas. She set up his nursery and prepared to raise the little boy on her own. As her due date approached, Amanda decided to reach out to Brian one more time to see if he wanted to be a part of his son's life and if she should give Hayden Brian's last name when he was born. On Sunday, August 14th, 2005, Brian called Amanda as she was about to leave for church. They arranged to meet at the Civic Center at 1 o'clock that afternoon with plans to go to lunch together at a seafood restaurant called Off the Hook. Amanda, dressed in an all-pink outfit, then attended church services at Calvary Assembly of God in the nearby town of Festus with her parents and sister. She was very happy that morning, and the pastor even commented on the glow she had about her. She seemed to be optimistic that Brian wanting to meet with her meant that he wanted to be a part of Hayden's life. Amanda's parents agreed to watch Hannah while Amanda went to meet with Brian. Amanda gave her daughter a hug and told her she would pick her up in a few hours. Amanda's younger sister, Carrie, felt uneasy about the planned meeting and wanted to drive over to the Civic Center with Amanda. Amanda told her that everything would be fine and went to meet Brian alone. Surveillance footage from a local drugstore on the way to the Civic Center shows Amanda purchasing a drink, a can of hairspray, and a keychain. These would be the last known images taken of Amanda. At 3 p.m., Amanda's father, Hugh, was surprised that Amanda had not yet returned to pick up Hannah. He told himself that this was a good sign and that Amanda and Brian were working out the details of the role Brian would play in Hayden's life. By 4 o'clock, however, he and Bertha began to worry that something had happened to their daughter. Specifically, they were concerned that she had gone into labor or experienced some other medical emergency related to her pregnancy. They called Amanda on both her cell phone and the landline at her house, but got no response. They also called several of Amanda's friends to see if she had reached out to any of them, but none of them had heard from her. They drove over to house to see if she had gone home, but she was not there. Hugh and Bertha did not know how to get in contact with Brian Westfall, and his name was not in the phone book. Bertha, therefore, began calling every Westfall listed in the phone book, trying to reach him. No one could put her in contact with Brian until she called the last number on the list. And the woman who answered the phone, Brian's mother, handed the phone off to him. Brian told Bertha that he and Amanda had gone to Off the Hook for lunch and parted ways around 2 o'clock. Several hours later, however, he called back to tell Bertha a slightly different story. Amanda had got upset while they were eating, and he had left the restaurant while she was in the restroom. Amanda's family then went to the Civic Center to look for her. There, they found her blue 1997 Pontiacs on fire, left unlocked in the parking lot. They did not find Amanda. Amanda's family then called authorities to report her missing. The physical search for Amanda at the fairgrounds began that night. Eventually, volunteers and search and rescue groups from states would become involved in the effort. The FBI performed aerial searches and several dog teams came in to try to trace Amanda's scent. Amanda's cell phone records showed that the last activity on her account was an incoming call at 1:15. The call was from her former sister-in-law, Rhonda. According to Rhonda, she could tell that there was something wrong with Amanda as soon as she answered the phone. The usually pleasant Amanda answered the phone call abruptly and then told Rhonda that she couldn't talk. Rhonda was so taken aback by how upset and intense Amanda sounded that she asked her if she had gone into labor. Amanda said no. Rhonda had been calling to ask Amanda a question about makeup she was picking up for her. Amanda was unsure of the answer and told Rhonda she couldn't talk right then and would have to call her back. Police contacted Brian Westfall that night and he provided them with a statement. He told them that he and Amanda had never gone to the restaurant. Instead, they had argued outside the Civic Center. He told her that he was not the father of her child and that she should not give her son his last name. Amanda was upset. She eventually asked if she could use the restroom inside of the center. He used his keys to let her into the building and locked the door after she came back outside. He then went back to work in the center's horse barn. Brian said that he left the Civic Center around 5:30 that evening. He claimed that as he was leaving, he saw Amanda sitting in her car, talking on her cell phone. There are a few problems with this version of events. First of all, this account varies greatly from both of the accounts Brian had previously given Amanda's mother. Furthermore, cell phone records show that Amanda had neither made nor received any phone calls after the 115 call from her former sister-in-law. The air conditioning in Amanda's car was also broken, and her family did not believe she would have stayed out in the car in the summer heat. Brian appears to have been honest about whether or not he and Amanda had gone to lunch that day in his account though, as surveillance footage from Off the Hook does not show either of them at the restaurant that day. The Westfall family owned several 100 acres of land in the area. Brian Westfall allowed police to search some areas of his property. However, since authorities did not have a search warrant and Brian was consenting to the search, they were only allowed look in areas he allowed them to, and they could not do as thorough of a search as they were conducting at the fairgrounds. Following this original cooperation, Brian and his girlfriend retained an attorney and have not spoken directly to authorities since. When asked for comment on the case, their lawyer has responded by saying that Bryant was not the father of Amanda's unborn son and that he had nothing to do with her disappearance. Amanda's ex-husband was also interviewed by police shortly after she went missing and was cleared as a suspect. Amanda's family has spent the years since her disappearance fighting to find her. They have given countless media interviews and have kept pressure on the authorities to keep working the investigation. They maintain a Facebook group to share information about the case and continue to organize volunteer searches. During one of these searches in May of 2019, cadaver dogs alerted on several locations around the grounds of the Civic Center. In June, the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office excavated several of these locations and cadaver dogs alerted on the newly exposed ground. However, nothing was found at any of these locations. Amanda's daughter, Hannah, went to live with her father until his death in November 2007. She then went to live with her maternal grandparents. In 2018, she was a college senior who planned to go to college to study nursing. Amanda Jones and her son remain missing despite her family's best efforts to locate her. They continue to hope that one day they will be able to lay them to rest. The FBI is offering a $20,000 reward in the case. 24-year-old Bianca Green of Romulus, Michigan had a lot on her plate in 2011. She was working 2 jobs, one of which entailed working very early mornings as a supervisor at a restaurant at Detroit Metro Airport. She was also going to school at Wayne County Community College to become a nurse. Bianca was also the loving mother to a 4-year-old son, Jameer, who was often called Little J, to distinguish him from his father, who shared his name. Jameer Sr. and Bianca had an on-again, off-again relationship. Bianca was not very outgoing and mainly socialized with her 3 younger sisters and 2 of her cousins. Jameer had been her first boyfriend, and while he and Bianca had periods of time where they did not get along, her family believes that she did love him. Bianca was last seen on March 25, 2011. At that time, she was between 6-8 weeks pregnant. The last person to see Bianca was her mother, Lisa. Bianca came to visit Lisa at her place of employment in the 41100 block of Harriet Street in Inkster, Michigan. At that time, Bianca was wearing her work uniform consisting of a black shirt and black pants. She has not been seen since. Her cell phone and purse went missing with her, but everything else in her apartment was left untouched, and her vehicle was also left behind. At the time of his mother's disappearance, Little J was with his father. Lisa did have contact with her daughter after last seeing her, however. That night and 2 days later, she received text messages from Bianca. She believes that the messages were truly from her daughter. In the messages, Bianca talked about being overwhelmed by her numerous and growing responsibilities. Lisa took over the payments on Bianca's cell phone bill so that the account would stay active, but there was no activity on it after those final text messages on March 27th, and calls to the number always went straight to voicemail. The Green family does believe it is possible that Bianca may have initially left her apartment on her own accord. Since Bianca never returned, however, they feared that she met with foul play after walking out of her home. While Bianca may have briefly cracked under the pressure of the stressors she was facing, her family does not believe that she would have abandoned her young son. Crime Stoppers of Michigan is offering a reward in the case. Leon Francis is a 62-year-old veteran of the United States Marines. He is also a beloved husband and father. His outgoing personality has made it easy for him to make friends with just about anyone he meets. Leon was last seen on January 14, 2020 at 6:10 a.m. by his wife, Daphne, at their home in the 400 block of Wind Drive in Newport News, Virginia. Leon appears to have abruptly left the house in the rain, taking only an umbrella with him. According to his family, this is highly out of character for him. After searching her home, garage, and backyard, Daphne called the police. Leon's disappearance is made even more serious by the fact that he suffers from Parkinson's disease. His condition requires him to take medications every few hours. His physical most likely has begun to deteriorate after going so many days without taking any medication. His family says that he may appear disoriented or as though he is having trouble walking. In addition to his cell phone and wallet, Leon also left behind other important items like his cane and his glasses that would have helped with his mobility when he left his house. There was initially some confusion over what Leon was wearing when he left his home. Originally, there were reports that he was wearing a New York Knicks starter jacket. Police later stated that he was wearing just a t-shirt, boxers, and one shoe, which is what he was wearing when Daphne last saw him. After reviewing footage from doorbell cameras in their neighborhood, Leon's family says that he was fully clothed when he left home. He was not dressed adequately for the cold weather, however, and footage taken at 6:49 a.m. appears to show him wearing basketball shorts, a t-shirt, crew socks, and sneakers, which may not match. They know he was not wearing his starter jacket as it was found at the home. Leon may also still be wearing a patient identification band from a recent appointment at the VA. Leon's umbrella was located behind a Wendy's approximately half a mile from his home. The rain that was falling at the time of his disappearance has complicated efforts to use dogs to track his scent. It is also possible that the dogs lost his scent because he was picked up by someone. Multiple law enforcement agencies, including the Newport News Police and the Virginia State Police, have been involved with the search for Leon, which has included ground searches and utilized drones to look for him from the air. In addition to all of the efforts Leon's family and law enforcement have made to find him, there has also been massive outpouring of support from his community. Volunteers have covered the area with flyers, leaving them on cars, handing them out in public areas, and posting them around the area. They have also conducted own searches, including ones in wooded areas near where Leon was last seen. Unfortunately, these extensive efforts so far have not located Leon. 81-year-old Margaret Becker, who goes by the name Helen, has been married to her husband Fred for 42 years. According to Fred, his wife is very friendly and can strike up a conversation with anyone she meets. On January 17th, Helen left the home she shares with Fred to run some errands at stores in the Southgate Plaza on US 27 South in Sebring, Florida, which was less than a 15-minute drive away. She did not come home. Surveillance footage shows that Helen arrived at the CVS at the shopping center at 4:19 p.m. She filled some prescriptions and left the store at 4:48. According to someone else in the store at that time, she appeared confused. Helen has not been diagnosed with any form of dementia or cognitive impairment. Helen is next seen on surveillance footage at 6:05 p.m. when she entered the Publix in Southgate Plaza. She purchased some bananas and left the store at 6:17. She appears unsteady in some of this footage, according to authorities. It is unknown where Helen went after leaving Publix, and it is also unknown where she was during the 77 minutes between when she left CVS and when she entered Publix. There are several other stores within the shopping center, but so far there is no evidence that Helen went into any of them that day. While Helen had a cell phone with her and an active OnStar account in her vehicle, neither of these has provided any clues as to where she or the vehicle traveled to. Authorities believe that activity at the nearby Avon Park Air Force bombing range may have interfered with Helen's GPS signals. Helicopters and small aircraft were used to search the area for Helen and her vehicle, a blue 2018 Chevrolet Colorado. While Helen lived in Florida, her truck had an Ohio license plate with tag number HOB 8214. The vehicle has not yet been located. Helen's husband and stepdaughter are doing everything they can to find her, but their efforts are hampered by the fact that they do not know where to search. Volunteers are organizing physical searches, but their search area could be more focused if witnesses who saw Helen after 6:17 p.m. on January 17th came forward or if Helen's vehicle is found. Authorities do not believe that foul play is involved in the case, but it is an open and ongoing investigation. Porter Albert of Fort Myers, Florida is lucky enough to have made it to the age of 78 without having any major medical problems or requiring any medication. Rather than requiring medical care, he instead was helping care for one of his neighbors, Chris Smith, who suffers from muscular dystrophy. For several days in the middle of January, none of his friends knew where he was. According to Chris Smith, Porter would not have abruptly left town without telling him because he knew how much Chris depended on him. Several of Porter's other friends, as well as his ex-wife, were also concerned that they had not heard from him in a few days, which was unusual. One of Porter's friends entered his home in the tropical trailer park and found Porter's cell phone and keys, but not Porter. He used the phone to call Porter's ex-wife, Diane, who lives in Las Vegas, and the two of them decided to report Porter missing. The last place Porter is known to have been is at Big Lots in North Fort Myers. The last activity on his credit card was at this store on January 21st. A police officer in Cape Coral, Florida, saw Porter's car, a silver Lexus sedan, driving east on Cape Coral Parkway. The driver made a U-turn, pulled into a parking lot, and turned off their headlights. 18-year-old Tiffany Contestable was driving the car. She told a police officer that she had pulled into the parking lot because she was running low on gas. The parking lot was across the street from a gas station. She claimed to a friend of Porter's and that she was using the car to search for him. She told the officer that she could not give him her driver's license because she had left it at home. In reality, she did not have a valid license. She was arrested for driving without a license and was released from custody later that same day. She is due in court on the charge on February 10th. Police in Fort Myers interviewed Tiffany, but have neither named her as a suspect nor cleared her of involvement in the case. She would not speak on camera with local media about Porter's disappearance, but told them that she and Porter were friends. She had gone to his home, discovered that he was not there, and took the car keys from the house which he left unlocked so that she could use his car to go look for him. Tiffany's bicycle was found inside of Porter's car. It is now back outside her home in North Fort Myers, and Porter's car remains in police custody. According to Porter's ex-wife, the stress caused by his disappearance has exacerbated their son's seizure disorder. Authorities say they have so far found no evidence suggesting that Porter is no longer alive, but Porter's friends and family fear that the chances of a positive outcome in the case dwindle as the case drags on. 70-year-old Janet Walsh lives on Dolores Drive in Shaler Township, Pennsylvania. Her daughter and son-in-law had plans to have dinner with her there on Monday, January 20th. When they arrived, however, neither Janet nor her vehicle were at the house. They spent a few hours trying to contact her, but when they could not reach her, they called the police at 8:30 p.m. Janet had lunch with her daughter and son-in-law just the day before. She seemed to be in a good mood and gave no indication that she was in distress. The last sighting of Janet was apparently at her church that same day, although the exact time of this final sighting has not been released. Janet's husband passed away just a few months ago, but her family says that she has been coping with the loss well. She had plans to begin volunteering soon. They also say that it would be completely out of character for her to just leave without letting anyone know. Also missing is Janet's vehicle, a silver 2018 Chevrolet Trax. It has a Pennsylvania license plate, number Q-6007. In addition to the Shaler Township Police, the Allegheny County Police is also investigating Janet's disappearance, which her family hopes will be solved quickly. Years have passed since Alyssa Burkett's untimely death, yet her legacy endures. Her daughter Willow has grown up surrounded by the love and care of her grandparents. Each year on Alyssa's birthday, the family gathers at her grave, honoring her beauty, kindness, and limitless love. Alyssa's memory remains alive in the hearts of her loved ones, reflected in the spirit and joy of little Willow. While the pain of her loss persists, her family finds comfort in knowing she continues to guide their thoughts, actions, and dreams for a brighter future. Alyssa Ann Burkett was born on December 31st, 1995, in Mesquite, Texas, to Teresa Ann Burkett and Joshua Forsyth. She was one of 6 siblings, with 3 sisters, Nikki, Madison, and Taylor, and 2 brothers, Lamden and Tyler. Alyssa showed her creative side from a young age, aspiring at age 7 to become a fashion designer and crafting her own clothing. She eagerly sketched designs and shared her dreams with her grandfather, Russell Forsythe, a songwriter, who encouraged her artistic passion and envisioned her continuing his creative legacy. However, by the age of 13, Alyssa shifted her aspirations, deciding to pursue a career in law. She explained to her grandfather that she enjoyed debating and felt a strong sense of purpose in it. Russell supported her new ambition, even though it required a different kind of discipline. Alyssa's journey serves as a poignant reminder of life's fragility and the importance of cherishing loved ones while they are near. After graduating from Roy's City High School, Alyssa enrolled in a local college. At 18, she discovered she was expecting a child with her boyfriend, Andrew Bird, who was 9 years her senior. This unplanned pregnancy caught Alyssa off guard and compelled her to reassess her life plans. Alyssa parted ways with Andrew, deciding to raise her daughter on her own. She dropped out of college and dedicated herself entirely to motherhood. On December 31st, 2019, her 24th birthday, Alyssa gave birth to a healthy baby girl whom she named Willow. Despite the challenges, Alyssa strived to be an exemplary mother. Her relatives noted that she wanted to provide her daughter with a stable and loving family, a privilege she was deprived of in her own childhood due to her parents' divorce. On her social media platforms, Alyssa appeared vivacious and open. She shared family photos, thoughts, and interests. Those close to her described her as straightforward, energetic, with a heart of gold and a radiant smile. Alyssa worked tirelessly to provide for her daughter. She was an assistant at a real estate firm and an employee at a management company. At the time of her demise, she was working at Greentree, a residential real estate company. She was stubborn, determined, sometimes selfish, but you couldn't stay mad at her for long. She had eternal beauty and charm, reminisced her grandfather Russell. He and the entire family were devastated when Alyssa's life tragically ended at the age of 24. Alyssa Burkett met Andrew Bird in her teenage years. He was 9 years her senior and appeared as a mysterious bad boy. Despite the protests of her relatives, Alyssa began to court him. The relationship was unstable and complex. Bird did not work and relied on Alyssa for support, yet he was possessive, causing scenes and monitoring every move of the young woman. Friends advised her to break up with him multiple times, but she always returned. In January 2019, 23-year-old Alyssa discovered she was pregnant with Bird's child. She decided to keep the baby, although she doubted Andrew as a future father. Eventually, she left him, choosing to raise her daughter on her own. On December 31st, 2019, Alyssa gave birth to a girl named Willow. With the help of her family, especially her grandparents, she tried to provide her daughter with a peaceful childhood and kept Baird away, deeming him unreliable. However, Baird was unwilling to back down. He initiated a fierce legal battle for custody of Willow, declaring he would achieve his goal at any cost, stating that nothing will stop him. Alyssa feared retaliation from his side. In April 2020, just 4 months after Willow's birth, a new woman entered Andrew's life, 22-year-old Holly Elkins. Elkins quickly moved in with Bird and began making plans for their life together and raising his daughter. The appearance of the young stepmother only intensified the conflict. Elkins saw Alyssa as a rival and actively sought to eliminate her from Bird's life. She positioned herself as the perfect mother for Willow. Alyssa felt a growing threat from her ex-boyfriend and his fiancée, GCE. Friends advised her to be cautious and wary of the worst. Little did she know that her life would soon be cut short by their hands. Shortly after Andrew Bird and Holly Elkins started their relationship, they launched a full-scale campaign to persecute Elizabeth. Their aim was to completely destroy her reputation and strip her of parental rights to gain full custody of Bird's daughter, Willow. In her messages, Elkins openly expressed her obsession with removing Alyssa as a mother. She wrote to Bird that Alyssa controls him, puts him first, and that he must show his submission to his ex and deal with this mess. Elkins insulted Alyssa, calling her a liar, stupid, and a bad man. Elisa stood in the way of their happy family life with Willow and urged him to take radical actions. One instance of slander was not enough for Elkins. Together with Bird, they installed a GPS tracker on Alyssa's car, monitoring her every move. Elkins then anonymously called 911, falsely reporting Alyssa for allegedly driving erratically, trying to discredit her to the police. Another time, Elkins went to the police and falsely accused Alyssa's mother of attacking her. To corroborate her story, she even deliberately scratched her own chest. The couple hired a private detective to find dirt on Alyssa and her new partner. Although the investigator found nothing incriminating, Bird and Elkins persisted. In September 2020, they themselves planted drugs and unregistered weapons in Alyssa's car and anonymously informed the police that Alyssa was allegedly dealing drugs from her trunk. During questioning, Alyssa tearfully insisted she had no involvement with drugs. She immediately suspected Bird's involvement, trying to tarnish her in the eyes of child services and the police. Unfortunately, she couldn't prove it. The persecution took on an increasingly menacing tone. A week before the murder, Elkins wrote to Bird, "I hope you can handle this." She demanded that he go or die for her, clearly hinting of the impending crime. Unbeknownst to herself, Alyssa was in mortal danger. She had only a few days left to live. Following direct instructions from his fiancée GC Holly Elkins, Andrew Bird began the direct preparation for the murder of Alyssa Burkett. They acted deliberately and methodically, planning every detail of the crime. On September 10, 2020, just 3 weeks before the tragedy, Elkins accompanied Bird to a sporting goods store. There, he purchased a black raincoat in cash, which he would later use in the attack. Elkins clearly assisted him in selecting suitable attire for the crime. On September 14th, they visited a pharmacy where Elkins bought dark foundation and other cosmetics for makeup. Evidently, she planned to disguise Bird to hinder his identification by witnesses. Later, the police would find this makeup in Bird's car, along with wipes containing traces of makeup. On September 19th, the couple visited a hardware store where they bought shotgun shells and a large Camillus knife. It was this shotgun and knife that Bird would soon use to carry out his vengeance on the mother of his daughter. Over the past week of September, Elkins inundated Bird with messages, goading him to put the plan into action. She wrote that they needed to deal with this go or die. Elkins explicitly stated that their relationship would be at risk if he did not follow through to the end. Receiving a clear signal, Bird got down to business. The search history on his phone shows that he began looking for information on how to remove gunpowder residue from his hands after a shot. He clearly did not want to leave any traces. 6 days before the attack, Bird bought a used black Ford Expedition advertised. He planned to use it for surveillance on Alyssa and his transportation to the crime scene. The seller later identified Bird as the buyer. A day before the attack, Bird attached a homemade silencer to his .22 caliber pistol. Although he ultimately did not use it in the attack, the mere fact of making the silencer demonstrates the purposefulness of his actions. Finally, on the morning of October 2nd, thing foreshadowed the tragedy. 24-year-old Elisa Bouquet, as usual, dropped off her 1.5-year-old daughter, Willow, at her grandmother's and headed to work at the Green Tree Homes Management Company in Carrollton. She parked her car in front of the office around 9 a.m. and was about to enter the building. At that moment, a black SUV sped towards her car at full speed. A man in a black cloak with a hood and a mask covering his face jumped out of it. In his hands, he held a short-barreled shotgun. Without giving Alyssa time to react, the attacker approached closely and shot her in the head through the side window. Alyssa slumped over the steering wheel, her face and hair drenched in blood. The killer rushed back to his car intending to flee. However, at that moment, although fatally wounded, Alyssa managed to open the door and almost fall out of the car onto the asphalt. With some incredible force of will, she crawled towards the office door trying to call for help. A bloody trail followed her. Noticing the movement, Bird swiftly turned around. He pulled out a large hunting knife from under his cloak and lunged towards Alyssa writhing on the ground. Grabbing her by the hair, he viciously began stabbing her in the neck, chest, and abdomen. In total, Bird inflicted no fewer than 13 stab wounds. From the injuries sustained, Alyssa died on the spot. When her colleagues, hearing the screams, rushed out to the parking lot, they found Alyssa in a pool of blood, her throat slashed. They tried to perform CPR, but in vain. By that time, Bird had already fled in his black SUV, leaving the bloodied knife on the parking lot. Random witnesses described the assailant as a tall, muscular man dressed in all black with a mask or hood on his head. Many mistook him for an African American. At the time of the attack, Holly Elkins, according to her own words, was at home with Bird's daughter, Willow. Thus, she had an alibi. Later, she told the police that Bird allegedly was with her all this time, which turned out to be a lie. The brutal daylight murder in a crowded place shocked the residents of Carrollton. They were puzzled about the motives of the criminal. However, Alyssa's relatives and friends immediately suspected Andrew Bird. They were aware of the protracted conflict between the former partners and feared the worst. Alyssa's mother, barely holding back tears, informed the police of her suspicions regarding Bird. She recounted his threats and obsession with her daughter, the prolonged legal battle for custody of her granddaughter. According to her, Bird had repeatedly stated that the living Alyssa Willow would not get. Thus began one of the most shocking and resonant trials in the history of Texas. A trial that made local residents rethink, seemingly, the familiar issue of domestic violence and stalking. The name of Alyssa Burkett will long be remembered as a symbol of maternal love and resilience in the face of cruelty. The investigation into Alyssa Burkett's murder began with questioning witnesses of the crime scene. Alyssa's colleagues detailed the appearance and actions of the assailant. Although he wore a mask, his tall stature and muscular build stood out. Some mistakenly took him for friends, and colleagues of Alyssa spoke of his obsession, constant surveillance, and threats. Alyssa's new boyfriend recalled that Bird mentioned their full home addresses, although they had not disclosed this information to him. Detectives began surveillance of Bird's house in Rowlett. Soon, they noticed Bird, accompanied by his fiancée, Holly Elkins, and daughter, Willow, carrying suitcases and bags out of the house, clearly preparing to leave for a long time. When Bird got into the car, the police stopped him on the pretext of lacking a license plate. During the search of the car, men's boots cut into pieces and soaked in bleach were found. Also discovered were remnants of camouflage makeup, napkins with makeup, and burnt parts of a brush for its application. In Baird's house, detectives found even more evidence, primarily batteries for GPS trackers that the criminal attached to the cars of Alyssa and her boyfriend. There was also a homemade silencer for a pistol and a whole arsenal of weapons. But the main discovery was a written script that Bird used when calling the police to report drugs in Alyssa's car. The police seized 3 phones from Baird, including a disposable one. In the search history of one of them, there were inquiries on how to remove gunpowder residue from Hans. He was clearly trying to cover his tracks. Meanwhile, on the outskirts of the city, an abandoned black Ford Expedition SUV was discovered. In the cabin, forensic experts found Alyssa's blood and fibers of a fake beard with Andrew's DNA. The car seller identified Bird as the buyer and remembered that he paid in cash and was in a hurry. Forensic examination revealed that the bullet that killed Alyssa was fired from the sawed-off shotgun found in the car. Bird's fingerprints were also found on the handle of a hunting knife. His handwriting was clearly identifiable in the GPS devices and in the calls with false accusations. It seemed that the prosecution had gathered comprehensive evidence of Andrew Bird's guilt. However, the prosecutors also aimed to hold his accomplice, Holly Elkins, accountable. Electronic correspondence between them came to the rescue, showing Elkins' role in planning and inciting the crime. The investigation lasted for several months. During this time, the prosecution meticulously assembled a mosaic of evidence, unequivocally incriminating the ruthless killers of Alyssa Burkett. The jurors were shocked by the cynicism and calculated nature of the criminals. They eagerly awaited the start of the trial to deliver a just verdict. The trial for the murder of Alyssa Burkett began in June 2022, almost 2 years after the tragedy. Sitting in the dock were 35-year-old Andrew Bird and his 23-year-old fiancée Guka, Holly Elkins. They were charged with stalking, conspiracy, and first-degree murder. From the outset, the prosecutors made it clear that they intended to seek the maximum punishment for both defendants. In their opening statement, they painted a picture for the jurors of a massive conspiracy to take the life of a young mother. The correspondence between Baird and Elkins left no doubt about the meticulous planning of the crime. A key prosecution witness was Christopher Mayo, Alyssa's boyfriend at the time of her death. He told the jurors about months of harassment and persecution orchestrated by Baird and Elkins against them. According to him, Alyssa had mentioned multiple times that Baird seemed like someone capable of killing her. Mayo recounted the phone threats, constant surveillance, and attempts to discredit Alyssa in the eyes of social services and the police. He stated that Elkins was the public master, directing Baird's actions. Her pathological jealousy and obsession with another's child ultimately led to the tragedy. Colleagues and friends of Alyssa shared the grief of the slain mother. Alyssa had confided in them, expressing fear of her unstable ex, feeling constantly watched. A few days before her death, she told a friend, "If something happens to me, know that Andrew did it." Forensic experts presented the jurors with a rich arsenal of physical evidence, unequivocally linking Baird to the crime scene. In addition to DNA and fingerprints on the murder weapons, there were traces of gunpowder and disguise fragments in his house and car. However, the nail in the coffin of the trial was the electronic correspondence between Baird and Elkins, eloquently demonstrating their joint plans. Phrases like, "I hope you can handle this, do it or die for me, this be asterisk, Teach must disappear," littered their messages in the days leading up to the murder. Baird's defense attempted to argue for the lack of premeditation in his actions. Supposedly, he only intended to scare his ex, but in a fit of rage, miscalculated his force. The defense emphasized the emotional distress and stress from the prolonged legal battle, but the correspondence in meticulous preparation for the crime completely refuted these speculations. Particularly telling were Baird's internet searches on removing gunpowder traces. Such actions do not align with those of someone who accidentally turned to violence. Elkins outright denied her involvement, citing an alibi. However, even here, her position was woven with white lies. Messages where she urged her partner to deal with the rival literally put a nail in the coffin of her innocence, at least in incitement. In the end, Baird admitted guilt on the main points. Apparently, he decided to mitigate his fate, avoiding a life sentence. He detailed, albeit quite impassively, the circumstances of the murder, his preparation, and motives. His key motive was an obsession with Willow, his daughter. Elkins stood her ground to the end. Even after the guilty verdict, she continued to proclaim her innocence and the injustice of the sentence. However, this did not help her escape a harsh punishment. In May 2023, the judge pronounced the verdict. Andrew Baird received 43 years in prison, effectively a life sentence. Holly Elkins was sentenced to 20 years for complicity. The courtroom erupted in applause. Justice, albeit delayed, prevailed. The killers of Elisa Burkett received their due. The loved ones of Alice, with tears in their eyes, expressed gratitude to the prosecutors and jurors. "Nothing will bring back our girl, but we are thankful that the guilty have been punished, and no one else will suffer at their hands," said Alice's mother to the journalists. This tragedy will serve as a bitter lesson for all victims of domestic violence for a long time. The untimely and cruel death of Alice Burkett shook the residents of Texas and the entire America. A young mother, beloved daughter and sister, she was killed in the most despicable and inhumane manner by the hands of her former partner and the father of her child. Her story became a tragic symbol of the epidemic of domestic violence, claiming thousands of lives annually. Despite the just verdict for the killers, Alice's family does not hide. Their loss is irreplaceable. "She was a ray of light in our lives," recalls her mother Teresa, determined with a huge, loving heart. She lived for her daughter and dreamed of giving her the best. Most painful was the fact that Alice sensed the danger and repeatedly reported it to her loved ones and the police. Alas, no one took her words seriously until it was too late. Perhaps more decisive intervention could have prevented the tragedy. "She told me, 'Mom, he will kill me.' I know, but what could I do?" The police shrugged, saying, Until he does something, we are powerless, Alice's Aunt Shelley shares in tears. Particular concern arises for Alice's daughter, 2-year-old Willow. She lost her mother at such a tender age and will surely not fully grasp the extent of her loss for a long time. Custody of the girl was granted to her maternal grandparents. They vowed to do everything to ensure Willow grows up in love and never forgets her mother. Every day, I show her photos of Alice, tell her how wonderful she was. Willow is still young, but she already reaches for the pictures, caressing them with her finger. Despite everything, we will continue to live on for her, says Alice's grandmother. Teresa, and Alice's story raises uncomfortable yet critically important questions. Why do signals of domestic violence victims often go unnoticed? How can we improve the protection and response system to complaints? What prevents us all from being more vigilant about the problems of friends and family? Experts urge early recognition of warning signs of abusive relationships, pathological jealousy, control, isolation from friends and family, outbursts of aggression. Victims need to know they are not alone and can seek help at any time by contacting hotlines or crisis centers. The most important thing is not to remain silent, not to tolerate, not to consider it normal. Violence is never acceptable and it rarely stops on its own. Alice was strong, but even the strong sometimes need help, emphasizes psychologist Anna Byers, leading a support group for abuse survivors. Alice's death should not be in vain. Her case once again shows how important it is to take threats and signs of violence seriously, especially when the well-being of children is at stake. No family drama is worth a lost life. The name of Alice Burkett will forever remain in the memory of her loved ones and fellow citizens. Her photos and posts on social media continue to gather likes, comments, and words of support even years after the tragedy. Many see in her an example of resilience and dedication to loved ones despite all trials. Rest in peace, dear Alice. You will forever remain in our hearts. We will continue your work and love Willow as you loved her. Justice has prevailed, and now you can rest peacefully. We will always remember your goodness, wilt her grandfather Russell on the first anniversary of her death. Perhaps someday in the future, Willow will be able to read these words and learn what an amazing woman her mother was. A woman who fought for her until her last breath and did not let her love fade even in the face of monstrous cruelty. Her short but bright life will forever be an example for all mothers. Alice Burkett's story is not just another criminal chronicle. It is a tragedy of a young woman who only wanted one thing: to love and raise her daughter. But her life was cut short by those who vowed to protect her: her child's father and his new partner. Obsession, jealousy, desire for control. These were the true motives driving Andrew Bird and Holly Elkins. Neither pleas from Alice, nor fear of the law, nor thoughts of the well-being of little Willow stopped them. In pursuit of a sick passion, they crossed the final line. The most frightening thing is that Alice's case is just the tip of the iceberg. Hundreds of women across the country face domestic violence, harassment, and threats daily. Many are afraid to speak openly about it, considering their burden shameful. Unfortunately, the outcome of this silence can be fatal. Alice's example reminds us we must not turn a blind eye to signs of abuse in our own lives or the lives of our loved ones. Pathological jealousy is not love. Constant control is not care, and outbursts of aggression are not character. These are warning bells, SOS signals that cannot be ignored. If you have become a victim of domestic violence, know that you are not alone. There are people and organizations ready to lend a helping hand. Do not be afraid to take this step. Do not wait until the situation becomes deadly. Your safety and right to a life without fear are paramount above all other considerations. It is our collective responsibility to raise the younger generation in respect and acceptance, to teach them to resolve conflicts with words, not fists or guns, to explain that love does not tolerate violence. Perhaps then our daughters will no longer perish at the hands of those they once let into their hearts. I don't know if Willow will ever understand why and for what her mother died, but I know for sure Alice loved her more than life. Her last thoughts were surely about her daughter, and there in the heavens, she continues to watch over her little one, said her brother Landon at her funeral. Someday, Willow will grow up and be able to read this story herself, the story of her mother's life, love, and struggle. May the memory of Alice be a source of strength and faith in a better future for her. And for all of us, a bitter lesson, a reminder, and a call to action. We owe it to her. We owe it to each other. Michelle Ray Cheney was born in Lakewood, Colorado, in February 1970. She graduated from Lakewood High School in 1988, initially planning to pursue a bachelor's degree. However, at 18, Michelle chose to take a 6-month break to prepare for the birth of her first child, a son named Michael, and care for him as a newborn. Determined not to delay her academic goals, she worked tirelessly to stay on track and earned her accounting degree from Regis University on schedule in 1992. That year brought many milestones for Michelle. After graduation, she began her career at KPMG Accounting. Later that fall, she married Brian Vanek and adopted his surname. The couple settled in Littleton, Colorado, where they welcomed 2 more children, Grant and Alexis, in the following years. Eventually, the family returned to Lakewood, and Michelle chose to leave KPMG to focus on raising her children and pursuing a new passion, supporting teen mothers. She played a pivotal role in establishing a support group for young mothers in the community. In 2003, Michelle gave birth to her 4th child, a daughter named Haley. Alongside her dedication to family and community, Michelle was an avid athlete. She trained for and competed in marathons and triathlons while also setting her sights on mastering high-altitude hiking. Living in Colorado, she was inspired by the state's 53 peaks exceeding 14,000 feet, known as the 14 Airs, and aspired to conquer these challenging summits. Michelle hoped to one day reach the summit of at least one of them. One of Michelle's friends, Eric Sawyer, had climbed 38 out of those 53 mountains. He and Michelle talked extensively about hiking one together. Michelle knew that she could not hike a 14er as a complete novice, so she spent over a year preparing for the endeavor and continuing to speak to Eric about the hike they hoped to one day take together. By September of 2005, Michelle felt prepared and made plans with Eric Sawyer to finally go on their long-discussed hike up a 14er. On September 23, 2005, 35-year-old Michelle and her husband Ben went to a sporting goods store and to a Costco to buy her new equipment for her much-anticipated hike. The following morning, September 24th, Michelle and Eric arrived at the Half Moon Trailhead at approximately 6:30 a.m. and set out for their hike by 7. For her first 14er, Michelle will be attempting to hike up the Mount of the Holy Cross, which has an elevation just barely above 14,000 feet. Eric Sawyer would later report that as he and Michelle set out that morning, he told her that he had a bad feeling about the hike. His instinct would eventually prove to be correct. Problems with the pair's planned hike started as soon as it began. Eric accidentally left his lunch and his water purification device behind in the car. When he and Michelle got onto the trail, they made another major mistake. The pair had planned to hike up to the mountain's summit via the more popular Half Moon Trail on the North Ridge. This route is the more direct and relatively easy way to reach the summit of the Mount of the Holy Cross, making it the obvious choice for Michelle's first attempt at hiking up a 14er. However, Michelle and Eric inadvertently diverted onto the Fall Creek Trail, which meant that they would be traveling to the summit along the Halo Ridge. This route is much more difficult, and the trip to the summit using it takes much longer. It was not an ideal route for a novice hiker like Michelle. Eric eventually realized their mistake but did not turn around because he and Michelle would not have had enough daylight left to reach the summit if they walked back to get on the correct trail. He knew that they could get on their intended trail at the summit for their descent and believed that this would still get them off the mountain in time, although it would be at a later time than planned. While Michelle was in good physical condition, her inexperience quickly began to show on the more difficult trail. She lagged behind Eric most of the way up the mountain, at times falling more than 50 feet behind him. Michelle and Eric had anticipated reaching the mountain summit and beginning the hike back down by noon that day and had packed their supplies accordingly. By 1:30 p.m. they were both out of water, a result of both their longer hike and being without a water purifier. When the ridge line flattened out some 400 yards away from the summit of the mountain, Michelle told Eric that she could not continue. Eric offered to begin the hike back down with her, but Michelle told him that she would wait while he finished climbing to the summit. Eric told her to either wait there or begin to make her way towards the East Cross Creek Trail, where they could meet to begin their trip down the mountain. Eric reached the summit of the Mount of the Holy Cross at 1:42 p.m. He then called his wife to let her know that he would be home later than he had previously told her due to how far behind schedule he and Michelle were. A couple, Bill and Julia Taylor, was also at the summit at that time. They spoke to Eric briefly, but would later report that he had been in a hurry to get back to his hiking companion. Eric took a photo of the Taylors and they took one of him. After only 5 minutes at the summit, Eric left to meet Michelle and begin their descent. Shortly after Eric left the summit, the Taylors heard him yelling. They initially believed that he was calling for help. When they got closer to him, they realized that he was instead calling Michelle's name. During the brief time Eric had been away from her, Michelle Vanek had vanished. The subsequent search for Michelle would become the largest search of its kind in the history of the state of Colorado. More than 700 people, a mix of search and rescue professionals and amateur volunteers, would eventually be a part of the effort. Michelle's friends and family volunteered both to search for her and to organize the support efforts needed to feed and supply such a large number of searchers. They were also able to collect enough money to pay for extra resources to look for Michelle. A total of 4 dog teams and 5 helicopters were used in search for Michelle. Eric had taken a photograph of Michelle during their hike, and when investigators saw it, they were believed to see that she had been better equipped than they had originally believed. She had been wearing 3 to 4 layers of clothing at the time she went missing. They also knew, however, that Michelle had no water and no water purifier with her. Eric Sawyer believed that the only food she had left when he last saw her was several nutrition bars and some energy gel. Another woman had survived for 9 days in a nearby wilderness area in 1997. So even as the search dragged on for days, there was still hope that Michelle could be found alive. However, overnight temperatures dropped into the 20s, and even dressed in layers, Michelle was ill-equipped for such temperatures. 4 to 6 inches of snow fell across the area 4 days after Michelle's disappearance. This would have posed an extra challenge for Michelle, but also provided the search teams with the possibility of new clues. They hoped that if they could find fresh tracks on the mountain, they would lead them to Michelle. Unfortunately, no such tracks were found. No trace of Michelle was found by any of the hundreds of people looking for her. 3 days after her disappearance, a group of searchers found a wristwatch hung up on the branch of a tree. They hoped that Michelle had left the watch there to indicate the direction she was traveling in and that it would be the first clue in the search. However, Michelle's friends and family were able to confirm that the watch was not hers. The lack of physical clues was both perplexing and frustrating. Typically by now, we have some sort of clue or evidence indicating some direction of travel or where she may have sheltered. Tom Cochran, the search commander from Vail Mountain Rescue, told the press. In these cases, you find a candy wrapper, a dropped glove. This girl had ski poles. Where is that stuff? On October 1st, a full week after Michelle went missing, hundreds of individuals spent the day searching for her. At the end of the day, still with no clues, Michelle's family agreed to the Eagle County Sheriff's Office and the Vail Mountain Rescue Group's plan to end the search for her. We are positive that Michelle's spirit remains in our hearts and in the Vail Valley. She now walks with God, they said in a news release. We are overwhelmed by the numbers of volunteers, their compassion, and commitment. It renews our faith in humanity. The most obvious and most likely scenarios that could have caused Michelle to go missing are, of course, her getting lost or having some sort of accident while her hiking partner made his brief trip up to the summit of the Mount of the Holy Cross. Given how thorough and extensive the search for Michelle was, the fact that she, along with every one of the items she had with her on her hike, remains missing is of course frustrating to her friends, family, and those who helped try to find her. Given the fact that Michelle was only alone for such a brief period of time and could not have gotten very far in that amount of time in the condition she was in, the experienced members of the search team were able to start their search in the most likely areas where Michelle could have run into trouble. When she was not located in any of them or during the expanded searches, the possibility that an unknown factor played a part in her disappearance was considered. There were a few things found during the course of the week-long search that could be viewed as troubling. While none of these items or details have ever been conclusively tied to Michelle's disappearance, they do potentially add to the mystery of it. For days after Michelle went missing, a group of searchers found a duffel bag with a shotgun inside of it off of the Cross Creek Trail. A few hours later, one of the dog teams searching for Michelle discovered several drops of blood in the snow south of the summit of the mountain. It was never determined if the blood came from a human or an animal. There was also an evasive man present on the Mount of the Holy Cross during the search for Michelle whose behavior could be viewed as suspicious. Members of the search team first encountered him on the first day of the search. He was coming down the trail when they came across him, and they tried to ask him if he had seen Michelle. He refused to acknowledge them or answer their questions and then hid from them behind a tree before finally sprinting away down the trail. Another group of searchers would later find a tent nearby. It was zipped up with a light on and a person inside. That person would not respond as the searchers tried to ask questions about Michelle from outside. Investigators from the sheriff's office believe they encountered the same man from the trail the following day. They had slightly more luck than the search teams as they did get him to speak to them eventually. He refused to show them his but gave a name after being questioned further. It is unknown if it was his real name. While this behavior seems odd given the fact that everyone he interacted with was just looking for information about a missing hiker, authorities say they have no suspect he had any involvement in Michelle's disappearance. The shotgun, the blood, and the elusive man could all be unrelated to the case and have perfectly innocuous explanations. Since there are no answers in Michelle's case, however, there is no way of knowing if these mysterious clues have any relevance to it or not. As the last person to see Michelle before she went missing, Eric Sawyer was interviewed by the authorities during the month-long criminal investigation into her disappearance. He answered questions about their movements that day and addressed concerns about the amount of equipment they had taken with them on the hike, but requested a lawyer when asked if he had anything to do with Michelle's disappearance. Investigators have not tried to interview him again, as they say they have no reason to doubt his account or any evidence suggesting that he had any involvement in Michelle going missing. Michelle's husband Ben, in his own interview with authorities, maintained that Eric would not have intentionally done anything to harm Michelle. He was also positive that Michelle and Eric were not having an affair. He did disagree with Eric and Michelle choosing to split up during their hike, describing Eric going up to the summit alone and leaving Michelle behind as an awful decision. This choice was also severely criticized by other experienced hikers. Michelle was the sister-in-law of a firefighter with the South Metro Fire Rescue Authority. After her disappearance, the South Metro Professional Firefighters Foundation, also known as the 2164 Foundation, began fundraising efforts that resulted in the establishment of the Michelle Vanek Scholarship. Michelle, who knew how difficult it was to finish school as a young single mother, spent much of her adult life trying to support other young women in getting their education while they were also raising their children. The scholarship created in her name is awarded to young single mothers in hopes that they will succeed in completing their education as Michelle did. Nick Massey was born in the Netherlands in 1939 and emigrated to Canada in 1957. 2 years later, he began working as a clerk for the Bank of Montreal. He was employed by them for the next 35 years, steadily moving up to positions with more and more responsibility. His various positions had him working in Halifax, Montreal, and Vancouver over the years. He was an active member of the Dutch-Canadian community and belonged to and held leadership positions in professional associations for this community. Nick married and had 2 children, but that marriage ended in divorce. In 1984, he met the woman who would become his second wife, Lisa. Lisa had also been married before and was also an immigrant, having been born in China. In Vancouver, she was working as a hairstylist. The couple met at a hair salon on Cambie Street, where Lisa would cut Nick's hair. Nick did well in his banking career and eventually became the manager of the elite private banking center at the Bank of Montreal. At the beginning of 1994, he retired from his position at the bank but continued to work. He worked as a stock promoter and received a directorship at Turbidine Technologies, a publicly traded company that was developing technology to reduce emissions from diesel engines. On August 10, 1994, Nick and Lisa were invited to join some of their friends at the Symphony of Fire fireworks display over Vancouver's English Bay. They had to turn down the invitation because they had a business dinner that evening. Nick was reportedly meeting with a businessman from California who had $10 million he was considering investing in Turbidine Technologies. Nick made a reservation for 4 at his favorite restaurant, Trader Vic's in the Cole Harbor neighborhood of downtown Vancouver, for 8:30 that night for the dinner. No one showed up to the restaurant for the reservation, and no one called to cancel it. The staff at the restaurant was surprised by this. They were familiar with Nick because he was a regular customer, and it was out of the ordinary for him to fail to show up for a reservation without at least calling to cancel it. The restaurant employee who took the reservation knew Nick and was able to confirm that it was in fact Nick who called to make it. 2 witnesses would later come placing Nick and Lisa in the area of the restaurant around the time they should have been there for their meeting. Both of these witnesses knew the couple personally and claimed to have seen them on the night of 10th at the Garden Lounge at the West in Bay Shore, which was next door to Trader Vic's. The couple was allegedly there from 6:30 to 10:30 p.m. According to the witnesses, Nick was drinking a bottle of wine and was dressed in a casual jogging suit. Lisa appeared to have come there straight from work, still dressed in the clothes she wore at her job. Neither witness believed that Nick and Lisa were dressed as though they were on their way to an important business appointment. The following morning, August 11th, Lisa made 2 phone calls from her husband's cell phone. She called the salon where she worked and left a message with a coworker that she had been called away for a few days for a court case. She then called Nick's business partner to say that he would be gone for a few days. Cell phone records would later show that the calls had been routed through a repeater on Bowen Island. This means that the calls could have been made from or near the couple's home in North Vancouver, or from a fairly large area along the coast. No one saw or heard from Nick or Lisa after these phone calls. After a few days, Lisa's sister became concerned and went over to the couple's home. When she arrived, she found the front door unlocked and the security system disarmed. There were 2 plastic zip ties on the floor by the front door of the home. The couple's 17-year-old Persian cat, Spider, was alone in the home with no food. According to Nick's children, he adored Spider and would never have left him uncared for. The couple's car was in the driveway and their passports had been left behind. Their bank accounts were left untouched. While some have speculated that Nick and Lisa had entered some sort of witness protection program, the 2 main theories about their disappearance are that they met with foul play or that they staged their own disappearances. There have been numerous theories about what circumstances could have led to either scenario. Most of these theories could provide potential motives for someone to harm the couple, but could also be reasons why the couple will be fearful enough of being harmed to abandon everything and leave Vancouver. Nick's job with the Bank of Montreal had given him connections in some of the most affluent social circles in Canada, but his business relationships also gave him ties to several financial scandals. One of his associates, Fred Hoffman, conned members of Vancouver's Dutch community out of $1 million with a Ponzi scheme. He, along with more than $10 million, vanished in April of 1991. Almost a third of that amount had been taken from a retired anesthesiologist from Seattle who had been introduced to Hoffman by Nick Massett. Nick had also been a personal banker for Harry Mal. One of Mal's many endeavors had been creating the Pine Ridge Capital Group, which collapsed in 1992. A scandal arose during this collapse when $1 million worth of investors' funds went missing. Mal eventually moved to the Cayman Islands. One of Nick's business relationships also had him involved in an active legal case in 1994. Nick and Lisa went missing just before Nick was due to testify against a businessman who had been one of his former clients and was on trial for allegedly stealing $100,000. However, Nick was only an incidental witness, according to Crown prosecutors. His disappearance was still successfully used by the defense lawyers in the case to get a 7-month-long delay in the trial. Nick Massett did appear to be under an unusual amount of stress for most of 1994, according to those close to him. He had become unusually secretive and tense and appeared to be concerned for his safety. This stress was very apparent to others at a funeral he had attended just before his disappearance. He was reportedly unusually distraught and said he wanted to get out of town for a while. After Nick and Lisa went missing, authorities also learned that they had made a secret trip to the Cayman Islands in April of 1994. They had not told any of their friends or family members about the trip. During their time there, the couple set up a bank account and had their wills drawn up. Nick's son, who was also named Nick, hired a private investigator named Ozzie Cabin to look into his father and stepmother's disappearance. The two men had a falling out after Cabin came to the conclusion that Nick Sr. and Lisa had staged their disappearance. He based this belief off of statements from witnesses he would not identify and a claim that he was able to use his connections to learn that Nick and Lisa's account in the Cayman Islands had more than $100,000 in it. Other reports indicate that the account held $50,000 worth of stocks. Authorities say that they have not found any evidence that Nick and Lisa fled their home to start a new life somewhere else. While Nick's position in the exclusive private banking center of the Bank of Montreal had given him connections to politicians, wealthy businessmen, and multimillionaires, it should be noted that Nick himself was not as wealthy as his clients. His highest annual salary from the bank was reportedly $85,000. While this is certainly not a small salary and is equivalent to more than $130,000 today, Nick's assets were nowhere near those of the clients whose money he helped manage. Nick and Lisa were $101,000 in debt between their mortgage, credit card debt, and business expenses. Financial stress is of course a potential motive for Nick and Lisa to have wanted to run away voluntarily, and Nick's position in the financial community may give the impression that he could afford to do so. However, while some of Nick's clients could have certainly financed such an action, it is unclear how Nick and Lisa would have been able to do so. Financial considerations aside, Nick Massey Jr. believes that his father was too straight-laced and conservative to take the sort of risks involved with faking his disappearance and starting a new life. In 2001, he, his sister Tanya, and Lisa's sister Loretta petitioned the courts in British Columbia to declare the missing couple legally dead. Authorities also believe that Nick and Lisa were victims of some sort of crime, even though the exact nature of that crime remains unknown. On July 30th, 2019, shortly before the 25th anniversary of the couple's disappearance, the North Vancouver detachment of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police held a press conference with Nick's children, Nick and Tanya, to appeal to the public for information. Perhaps the time that has gone by would allow somebody to come forward now that otherwise might have remained silent in the past, Nick Massey Jr. said at the press conference. Nick and Tanya also announced that they were doubling the amount of the reward they are offering for information in the case from $25,000 to $50,000, despite the amount of time that has passed since they have seen their father and stepmother, and the fact that they believe them to be deceased. Nick and Tanya still hope to find answers about what became of Nick Sr. and Lisa. Everybody loses their parents at one time in their life, but then you have a funeral, and we don't have that, and that part has been extremely difficult, Tanya said at the press conference. I think it will be the greatest gift we could ever receive closure. Maurice Niffel married his wife Jean in January of 1946 when they were both just 21 years old. The couple had two daughters, Kimberly and Candace, who went by Candy. In 1958, the family moved to Hardington, Nebraska. Eventually, Maurice would become the town's mayor, but not because he ran for the office. Rather, the respected businessman became the first person in town history to be elected to the position based solely on write-in votes. After decades of helping her husband with his dry cleaning business and raising a family with him, Jean passed away in 1978. In 1983, 58-year-old Maurice was living in Sioux City, Iowa. He owned and operated 50 cleaners on West 26th Street. He had a girlfriend, Joyce Fish, who he had been dating for a few years. Joyce would be the last known person to see Maurice on Valentine's Day of that year. He left her home around 9:30 that night, driving his brown 1981 Fleetwood Cadillac. He has not been seen since, and his vehicle has never been located. Joyce and Maurice had plans for him to pick her up the following morning, February 15th, and drive her to work. Maurice never arrived. Joyce began making calls to try to him, but with no success. Maurice never arrived at the dry cleaners that day, which was out of character for him. Joyce and her daughter Lori reported Maurice missing to the authorities on the morning of February 16th. At the time of Maurice's disappearance, he was hoping that his daughter, Candy, would end her marriage. Her husband, Delbert Buchan, was facing charges that could earn him his 4th prison sentence. Maurice reportedly had found evidence supporting the charges against his son-in-law and was willing to testify against him. Maurice vanished before he had the chance to. Wallace certainly would have given Delbert a motive to get rid of his father-in-law. There is no evidence connecting him to the case. Candy passed away in 2004, and Delbert passed away in 2008. Today, Maurice will be 95 years old, making it unlikely that he can be found alive. Maurice's name is inscribed on his wife's tombstone, in hopes that one day the mystery of his disappearance will be solved and he can be buried alongside her. In 1995, 21-year-old Ronald Duck Jr., who was known as Ronnie, was serving in the United States Navy and training to become an electronic communication technician. He had just returned from 3 months at sea in February and was set to board the USS Stephen Groves again on Valentine's Day. The weekend prior, he traveled from Naval Station Pascagoula to his hometown of Eclectic, Alabama, to visit his family before he was sent back out to sea. His wife, Suzette, was just weeks away from giving birth to their first child. After returning to Pascagoula, Ronnie was given liberty on the evening of February 13th. He and one of his shipmates spent the night in Ocean Springs, Mississippi, playing pool at a billiards club. They returned to the naval station at approximately 3:15 a.m. on February 14th. The guard at the station's first gate saw Ronnie in the car with his shipmate when they arrived back. When the car reached the second guard station, however, Ronnie was not in it. Ronnie allegedly got out of his shipmate's car to go speak with someone after passing through the first guard station. There was reportedly a sighting of Ronnie at 3:30 a.m. along the docks around the naval station, just 50 yards away from where he was supposed to board his ship later that day. Ronnie did not report for duty on the ship as scheduled. The Navy initially treated Ronnie as being absent without leave, but his family believed that his disappearance was not voluntary. Maroon pickup truck was found in the parking lot at the naval station. The floorboards were muddy and a carton of cigarettes and some sailor's ivory soap Ronnie had purchased for his time at sea had been left inside of it. Ronnie's wife had written him a $40 check out of their bank account so that he could cash it in order to have some spending money, but he never cashed the check. If Ronnie left on his own accord, he did so without any resources whatsoever. Ronnie's family believes he met with foul play, largely because he had told them that he feared for his life when he had visited them a few days before his disappearance. During a previous time at sea, Ronnie had been asked by a group of other sailors to buy them all some marijuana. The person he tried to buy it from turned out to be an undercover naval intelligence officer. Ronnie cooperated with the officer's investigation and testified against another sailor. That sailor received a less than honorable discharge from the Navy for smoking marijuana on board the ship a few days before Ronnie went missing. Ronnie had also helped Naval Investigative Services before when he had been stationed in Michigan. Some of his current shipmates learned about this and believed that Ronnie was working undercover for them. Ronnie told his family that because of all this, he was receiving threats. Ronnie's family came to Pascagoula after he went missing to set up a command center and post flyers asking for information. They made frequent trips from Alabama to Mississippi to search for him, but with no success. Ronnie's mother spent most of her time trying to find new leads in the case so that she could find her son's remains and give him a proper burial for the 15 years following his disappearance. She passed away in 2010 without fulfilling this goal. Ronnie's wife, Suzette, gave birth to his daughter 6 weeks after he went missing. At the time, mother and daughter were not entitled to any help from the Navy. 30 days after Ronnie failed to report to his ship since he still had not been found, he was declared a deserter and his family lost his benefits. The case has since been reclassified by the Navy, and he is considered missing instead of absent without leave. The daughter, Ronnie never had a chance to meet, will turn 25 this year and lives in Alabama where she works as a registered nurse. 38-year-old Lloyd Chamberlain lived in Merritt Island, Florida and worked as a private commercial fisherman. On February 14, 2016, he left Port Canaveral on his Sea Pro Center console boat at approximately 10:30 in the morning with plans to return from his day of fishing by dusk. However, he never arrived home. When it was dark outside and Lloyd still had not arrived home, his friends and family went to Port Canaveral to look for him. There, they found his black Chevrolet Silverado pickup truck and his boat trailer, still parked in the parking lot. They did not find Lloyd or his boat, however. Around 10 o'clock that night, Lloyd was reported as an overdue boater to the Coast Guard. The subsequent search for Lloyd involved the Brevard County Sheriff's Office, the Coast Guard, and the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. At 11:32 p.m. that night, a ping from Lloyd's cell phone placed him 2.5 nautical miles off the shore of Indian Harbor Beach. The Coast Guard sent out a search and rescue boat to the location. At 12:20 a.m., the boat was found coming ashore just a few miles northwest of the location where the cell phone had pinged. Lloyd was not on the boat. The boat had come in at Indian Harbor Beach, and all the items on board were examined. While the boat had taken on a lot of water, it was still seaworthy, and Lloyd's fishing rods were still in their holders. Lloyd's life preserver was still on board, but authorities hoped that he had a life jacket or some other sort of flotation device with him, and was still floating somewhere in the water waiting to be rescued. Boats and planes searched for Lloyd from Vero Beach to Flagler Beach, eventually covering an area of more than 5,000 miles. While the ocean had been calm on Sunday when Lloyd went out, conditions were far more challenging on the following 2 days. Strong winds, rip tides, and high waves complicated the search effort. At 7 p.m. on February 16th, with Lloyd still not found, the search for him was called off. The decision was especially painful for Lloyd's girlfriend of 6 years, Melody, and her 3 children, to whom Lloyd had been a strong father figure. Their father, Melody's husband, had died during a boating accident in the Indian River 8 years before Lloyd's disappearance. Lloyd has still not been located. 70-year-old Yuba Thornton lived in Orchid Springs, Florida with her husband. On the morning of February 14, 1984, she drove him to work in nearby Winter Park, Florida. She did not, however, return to pick him up at 2 o'clock that afternoon as planned, and was reported missing to police. Yuba's 1981 Pontiac was located the following day, stuck in the mud in a rural area southwest of Kissimmee, more than 30 miles away from where she was last seen. The car was locked, and there was no sign of Yuba. Authorities feared that Yuba had somehow become disoriented and exited her vehicle, still in that condition, when she became stuck in the mud. Yuba had a heart condition and required 3 different medications, none of which she had with her when she went missing. Over 100 people were involved in the subsequent search for Yuba. Searching the swampy area near the south end of Lake Topocaliga was a challenge. Helicopters, tracking dogs, an airplane, off-road motorcycles, and 4-wheel drive vehicles were all utilized in the search. Members of the search team also looked for Yuba on foot and on horseback. No sign of Yuba was found during the search. The following month, investigators finally received a new lead when a hunter discovered a purse and umbrella near Lake Hatchnaha, further south from the original search area. Yuba Thornton's identification was inside the purse. This discovery resulted in a new search being conducted. A pair of eyeglasses believed to belong to Yuba was found, but not Yuba herself. She remains missing. Paul Krashik served in the United States Army from 1966 until 1974. His experience in the armed forces during the Vietnam War led him to discouraging his daughter Darlene from following in his footsteps and enlisting in the Army after she graduated high school in 1985. His wife Betty Lou, fearing for Darlene's safety, also tried to talk her out of enlisting. However, Darlene was very headstrong and was determined to follow through with her plans. She did join the Army, and in 1987, she was stationed at Fort Carson in Colorado. She had achieved the rank of specialist and was assigned to the 73rd Maintenance Company. On March 16, 1987, 20-year-old Darlene and several other members of her unit went out to Shuffles, a club on South Academy Boulevard in Colorado Springs that was popular with soldiers from Fort Carson. The group spent the evening dancing and having a few drinks together. Because they had work the next morning, most of the group went home early that night, but Darlene stayed later than the rest of her friends. The last known sighting of Darlene was sometime between midnight and 1 a.m. when a witness saw her leave the club. At approximately 5:20 that morning, March 17, 1987, 2 police officers were conducting early morning business checks. Near the dumpster in the alley behind the Korean club restaurant, they discovered a woman's body. The woman was nude, save for her gray pants, which were pulled down to her ankles, and one sock. She had a black rope around her neck and a wire hanger around her head. The officers found a driver's license nearby and had identified the woman as Darlene Krashik. The location where she was found was on the same road as Shuffles. Approximately a mile south of it, authorities did not believe that the alley was the site of the crime. Rather, they believed that Darlene's body had just been left there. Darlene had been severely beaten, but her autopsy would show that she had died as a result of strangulation. She had also been sexually assaulted. According to those who knew Darlene, she had a heart of gold and was willing to provide help to anyone who needed it. No one could provide investigators with leads about anyone who would have wanted to hurt her or any potential motives for her murder. She was well liked in her community and had a close group of friends, but no known enemies. She had not gotten into any sort of argument or altercation with anyone at the club the last night she was alive that could have escalated into violence. Army CID and the Colorado Springs Police Department interviewed hundreds of people, both soldiers and civilians. They identified a handful of persons of interest, but were unable to make any arrests, and the case ultimately went cold. While they were unable to pinpoint an exact motive for the crime, investigators did speculate, based on the last phone conversation Darlene had with her mother, that her death may have had something to do with the Army. Just weeks before her death, Darlene was excited about her future in the Army and the opportunities it was providing for her future. However, when she spoke to her mother on the phone a week before her murder, Darlene was upset about something that was going on at Fort Carson and wanted to get away from the installation. She told her mother that she could not explain to her why she was so upset at that time. The Krashik family worked hard on their own investigation into Darlene's case and on keeping her story in the public eye. They came to Colorado Springs to distribute flyers asking for information in Darlene's voice. I was only 20 years old. They took my dignity, my pride, and my jacket. Then, without mercy, they took my life. If you know something and think it's insignificant, you're mistaken. It's probably the missing link. Betty Lou and Paul Krashik investigated similar crimes from all over the world, filling up their home office with files and newspaper clippings. As the original investigators retired or were reassigned, the couple would call their replacements to make sure that they knew about their daughter and were working on her case. They kept Darlene's picture with them in their Bible. Darlene's case was reopened several times in hopes that new technology would finally identify her killer. In 2004, DNA from an unknown male was identified on several pieces of evidence and on several areas of Darlene's body. Originally, only a partial DNA profile was identified from this evidence, but in 2016, a much stronger profile was isolated. Unfortunately, no match to this profile was found in local or federal databases. That same year, the DNA evidence was submitted to 2 different laboratories. For further, it was sent to the United States Army Criminal Investigation Laboratory for YSTR analysis, which focuses specifically on the Y chromosome. The evidence was also sent to Parabon Nanolabs that December. Parabon used their snapshot DNA phenotyping program to create an image of what the contributor of the DNA may have looked like at the time of the murder, and in 2016, based on his DNA. They had no way of knowing the perpetrator's actual age, so they had to assign one. The images were generated to show the unknown male in his mid-20s, as he may have been in 1987, and in his mid-50s, as he may have been at the time the images were created. These images were released to the public in March of 2017, but despite the offer of a $10,000 reward from the Army, no one came forward correctly identifying the man in the images. In early 2019, Army CID and the Colorado Springs Police Department asked Parabon to submit the DNA profile to GEDmatch, an online genetic genealogy database, and try to use genetic genealogy to identify their suspect. Using this method, Parabon was able to identify several distant relatives of the individual who had left his DNA at the scene. The closest relatives were a woman and her daughter living in Wisconsin, and another woman living in Texas. These women were believed to have a 6th to 9th degree relationship to the contributor of the DNA profile being investigated, meaning they could be as closely related as second cousins once removed, or as distantly related as fourth cousins. By constructing the family trees of the relatives found in the GED-Match database and comparing them, Parabon was able to narrow down what branch of their family they shared with the unknown male. Parabon was then able to identify a potential suspect found in all of their family trees, who would have shared the same amount of DNA as the person with a DNA profile from the crime scene. That suspect was 58-year-old Michael David White. White had served in the Army from October of 1979 until April of 1998. Working as he had been stationed at Fort Carson from September of 1986 until August of 1987. After leaving the Army, White went to work for CenturyLink. He worked there for the next 2 decades, and eventually he rose to the position of senior network engineer. In 2019, he was living in Thornton, Colorado, just north of Denver, with his wife. He had no criminal record. On May 20th, 2019, 2 detectives went to White's residence and saw him get into his car. They then followed him to work. Later that day, they followed him as he left work on his lunch break and went to a nearby fast food restaurant. There, they watched him drink from a cup as he ate his meal. When White left the restaurant, leaving the cup behind, the 2 detectives collected it in hopes that a DNA sample could be taken from it. They also surreptitiously swabbed the door handle of White's car as another potential source of his DNA. Testing showed that Michael White's DNA matched that found at the crime scene. On June 13, 2019, 32 years after Darlene Krashik's murder, he was arrested at his home and taken into custody on a no-bond warrant. He is being charged with first-degree murder after deliberation, first-degree felony murder, and aggravated first-degree sexual assault. White's wife told local reporters that her husband is innocent of the charges against him, and that their entire family is shocked by his arrest. Darlene's parents traveled to Colorado from their home in West Virginia to attend Michael White's first appearance in court shortly after his arrest. The appearance was only about 5 minutes long, but the trip was still worth it for the Krashiks. They returned to Colorado for a preliminary hearing in the case on October 25th. Paul and Betty Lou have pledged to make the trip to Colorado for every one of Michael White's court appearances. The Krashiks are hoping that after 32 years of freedom, White will live long enough to serve 32 years in prison. He had his probation. Now it's time to do his time, Paul told Fox 21 News. I would just tell him that I feel sorry for his mother, Betty Lou said in the same interview. He took my life away from me when he took Darlene, so I can only imagine what his mother feels knowing what he did. Michael White is currently being held at the Criminal Justice Center in Colorado Springs, and his next court appearance is scheduled for February 18, 2020. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.